Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. Today I have a short Transform Tuesday. Today may be a short session, but I think you're going to find it interesting. I'm also here to answer questions if you have any. You can type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can send those questions to tfservice, as in transform, tfservice at alphasoftware.com. That email is monitored by a team of people here, and we're happy to get back to you with answers. So let's begin. Now, about 2 weeks ago, in fact, exactly 2 weeks ago, we were talking about using Alpha Anywhere along with Alpha Transform to create what were called these OnSubmit events. These were things that happen when you submit a record to Transform. And the example that we used was we had it produce an invoice for us based on the items that were entered into a form. And then we ended up mailing that form off to a predetermined address, although we could have also done it using a soft address, meaning that the form could have specified where the report or the invoice should have gone. Today, we're going to be looking at another type of OnSubmit event, and this one has to do with routing. So let's get started. But before we get started, Sarah, just real quick, I just want to make sure that you can see my screen and you can hear me.
I cannot see your screen at all.
You can't see my screen at all.
No, it's not shared. You need to do that.
Thank you. See, this is one of the many reasons we have you on this call. Let me go hit the right button so we can share. Fortunately, I wasn't sharing anything particularly exciting so far, so you missed nothing. All right, there we go. Do you see Transform Tuesday on Alpha Transform and my screen now?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Thanks so much. All right, so I'm going to scroll down here to slide 303 today, and we're going to talk about routing. So imagine this. So we've done a lot of examples in which we've created forms that were for individuals to use. Maybe that form is dispatched to an individual out in the field who performs an inspection or a repair or some other type of field service. And then they enter their data into that record and it goes back into Transform Central. But imagine that you're working instead of with individuals, but you're working with individuals who are operating as a team. And one good example of that is in construction. So here in the United States, we build things typically with wood. And I know this is not true in Europe. There are different construction techniques, but just bear me out if you're on the opposite end of the ocean from us. So when you do build a home and you're doing interior walls, the first thing that you do, and I've got it actually quite backwards here, is you do the electrical work. So the electrical work goes inside the wall. This is just a stock photo. I'm not sure I approve of that electrical work, to be honest with you. It kind of looks like a mess. But anyway, the electrical work goes through the wall, and then an electrical inspector comes and makes sure that all of the work is done properly. Then the next person who comes along is the insulator, and those are the people who put up the insulation. So they go and they actually cover up all these wires with insulation to make the wall soundproof and heat-proof, cold-proof, and so on. And so obviously you need to do one inspection before you do the other because otherwise the wires are all covered up. So imagine you had one inspector or one electrician working on a team for you, and they had to go to a home and do an inspection of the electrical. But when they were done, they wanted to let the next person in line, the insulator, know that it's time for them to go do their job. So in other words, they get a form, but then they route this to another person after they're done with their form and basically dispatches out a new form to them. So today's example, I have created two forms, and here's just what they look like in the preview window of Transform Central. I have the electrical inspection form and an insulation inspection form. So in the electrical inspection form, we have the name of the property manager. This might be the owner, the address of the property, including the city, state, zip, or postal code. And then if you were to scroll down, which you can't because this is a screenshot, but if you were to scroll down, you could enter in the electrical inspector's badge ID number and maybe their name or something like that. Or perhaps Transform is smart enough to fill in those fields for them automatically. Once it's passed inspection, though, What we want to do is issue another form, a completely different form actually, to the person who does the installation. So if they're going to do the installation, there are some things that have already been filled out on the electrical form, and there's no point in having to fill them out again. And they would include the name of the property manager, the address, city, state, zip, and also who was the name of the person who did the electrical inspection before the installation was put in place. So you could see, you could then route this maybe from the installation, you could go to the person who puts up drywall or blue board, and then to the plasterer, and then to the painter. And you could just have one form that issues another form that issues another form. Likewise, you can actually have one form that gets sent, the exact same form, to the next person to fill out the rest of the remaining fields. So I hope you can kind of see what the value might be in doing that. So let me just go ahead and show you how you go about doing it. Again, we turn to Alpha Anywhere, which is, think about it in this case as a companion product to Transform. And in Alpha Anywhere, we can define the OnSubmit events that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So let's go ahead and get out a PowerPoint and go right into a live demo. So I'm going to click here and go into Alpha Anywhere. And here I am in the Alpha Anywhere development environment. So here in Alpha Anywhere, when I'm on the Web Projects Control panel, I can go up to the Tools menu and I can choose More, Transform Utilities, and then Builder for Transform OnSubmit event. And I'm going to open that up. Now what I'm going to do here is, because my Transform account already has some OnSubmit events, I'd like to load them up here so that I can edit them, maybe delete them, or in this case, add a new one. So to do that, I'm going to click the hyperlink that's called Fetch Definition from Transform Central. And to do that, I need to enter in my API key. As a quick review, you can find the API key here. Oops, not there. You can find it here on the home page of Transform Central. That's at transform.alphasoftware.com. Okay, so let's move down to where it says API keys. It's under developer options. I'd say get API key. And we're using the OnSubmit events. You often need to actually use the all command because sometimes we have to write some data back into Transform. That basically tells what the API key is allowed to give a piece of software permissions to do. So to do that, you would click all and you'd click API key. And what would happen is a box would appear here with your API key, and there's another box next to it to copy it. Although of course you could just highlight it and right click and copy it just like you normally would. So that's how you get the API key. Let's pop back down into Alpha Anywhere. Once that's pasted in, I'm going to say Fetch Definition, and it's going to show me all of my OnSubmit actions. Now this is a demo account. I seem to be making an awful lot of OnSubmit actions. If you recall, a couple weeks ago, I did one for a report based on invoice, and that was the one that created the invoices that get sent out by email when an invoice form is filled in on the phone. Today, though, we did a different kind. It was called a dispatch route for a form, and I'm going to show you how that's put together. I can either add a new one, or I can show you the one I've already built. Let's add a new one for now, though. So I'm going to click Add. And now I get to choose my action. Last time we did report, but this time we're going to go dispatch or route a form. And with dispatch, as it explains here in the text, you can either send, after a form is submitted, you can send the same form to someone else to finish out the rest of the data. You could send the same form to someone else, and in the process, you could also modify some of the data on the way in. There might be some reasons for doing that. Or in today's example, you can dispatch an entirely different form to another user, but where some of the data is already filled out based on the form that was originally submitted. Okay, hopefully you're with us so far. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to say, now that I've created it, the first thing, it appears here, but I'm going to go and click Edit Action so I can define how it works. So to begin, I am going to choose the name of the form that's going to do the dispatching. And again, it requests my API key, but since I've entered it already once, I don't have to type it in again. And I'm going to select the form name, or rather the form type. And I have a whole bunch of them in my demo account, but the one that we're going to start with is with the electrical form. So that's the one I call A electrical. And I'm going to click OK. And then after that, we're going to go and take a look at the conditions at which this should happen. So maybe when I submit something, maybe the electrical isn't quite done. Maybe they said, look, I've run into a problem, and you don't want to alert the person who's doing the installation that it's time for them to do their job because, well, it's not. And so this is where condition comes into play. And you kind of have to fill in fact, I think you have to fill in all of these. So we're going to go through them one by one. And each of them require just a little bit of JavaScript, which basically means a little bit of copying and pasting. So we're going to click on condition, and here it shows you some ways that you could do programming that would result in a true or false value. But we're going to assume for our purposes that it's always going to be true. In other words, we're always going to submit this form. So I just had to copy out that little section that I needed there, and I'm going to move down here, and I'm going to paste it. And that's it. So that's the first thing we need to do, is to tell it, hey, when that happens, I want you to always perform this action. Now, action type, I've got two choices here. I've got route and I've got dispatch. So think of route as taking the same form and sending it to someone else with it partially filled out. But with dispatch, you're going to be taking a different form and routing that one instead. So I'm choosing dispatch. And now it's going to ask me, okay, so which form do you want to dispatch? So again, I'm going to click on that little ellipsis button there. And I could say, I'd like to send another copy of this same form definition. In other words, send over a blank one to this person. That's not what we're doing here. We actually want to send a different form. So I'm going to click on different form. As an advanced option, you could have JavaScript decide what form needs to be sent out, but we're not going to do that right now in today's example. So I go here and I click select, and again, API key is asked for, and I can select the form name. And because I'm on the electrical form, the one I want to dispatch next is the insulation form, because that's what comes next. So I've chosen insulation as my form type, and then I click OK. Now the next thing is, do we want to change the status to anything? I'm going to leave the status of this form to open. So when we create this new copy that. When we create this new form, this new installation form, I want it to be marked as open so that the person can actually fill it out. So I'm going to click OK on that. Moving down the line, the question is, to whom do we want to submit it? And I'm going to hard code this for now. Again, I'm just copying some JavaScript, and I'm going to send it to me. So let me paste that in. And so instead of fred@acme.com, it's going to be dave@alphasoftware.com, semicolon, because it is JavaScript. And that's where it's going to be sent. I'm going to click OK. Comments. I don't know if many of you use this feature, but a form could have comments associated with it. And you could get to those comments from the hamburger menu when you're in the transform filler. I'm going to say that I'm not going to include any comments in this one. So I'm just going to make that blank. Ooh, or better yet, I could write no comment. There we go. And I'm going to click OK. All right, next one is due date. You might want to assign a due date to it. I don't necessarily care. I'm going to put in some due date that's sometime in the future. You could add a year to the submit date, or a month, or a week, or a day, or something like that. There are all kinds of different ways you can calculate this value. Let's set this a bit in the future. Okay. And then down here we have the more fields. I'm not going to get too much into these. These are the user assigned fields that happen sort of up at the top level. It's much more useful if you're using, or if you're doing some API programming, to be using these fields. But what I'm interested in are the proper form fields, and I'm going to find that here under dispatch data. So under dispatch data, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on dispatch data, and again I get some more sample code. Well, but the code we want to do is we just simply want to write some stuff. And so here's how we do that. We take this little snippet here and paste it down there. Bump. And here's our little code block. And here's how this code block works. var equals obj, meaning it's creating a new object. And in the last one, var result equals obj, meaning it's passing that object as the result. So what's in the object? Well, the object you could think of as the field mapping. So in our example here, it says, well, field one for the form that I'm going to should be assigned to the data from the field that dispatched it. Let me give you a little example of what that data might look like. So here's my source data. These are the ones that you would find in the electrical inspection form, because that's the one you fill out first. And you'll notice that one of the fields is called property manager. So I'm going to put in, instead of field one, I'm actually going to put in the word property manager. And then I need to set it to a value. And the value I'm going to set it to is form data field. And we'll see, what did I call property manager in the source data? I also called it property manager. So I could just say equals property manager. Now, I could keep going and assigning the rest of the fields, but I don't think that I really need to. I'll just know that what you would do next is set the next field that you had in your target, which you can find. If you're not sure what the field names are, you can always go back to your definition, which I'm going to go to right now. Let's go to the designer, and we're going to go to the insulation field. And so let's take a look at, so address, we called that field address, for example. And so I could go back to Alpha Anywhere and say address address equals form data dot, and then the question is, what do we call it here? And we also called it address. It's good to name your fields, by the way. I've been over that, I think, in many Transform Tuesday sessions, that your fields by default are, even though you give them a title, but they're numbered field 1, field 2 through field 3, field 4. You really want to change that to something more sensible for times like these when you need to actually refer to those fields in code. So here I have a defined data element. And at this point, I should be able to test, but let's just do one last check. So let's start with the field, the form that I'm coming with. That's the electrical form. The condition is true. It's always going to be performed. The action type is dispatch, meaning I want to be able to use a brand new field of a different kind. That different kind of field is called our A installation field. The status we set to open so that the form can still be filled in. The person, in this case, we hard coded to me, but we could have taken that out of the one of the form fields from the previous forms. Comments featured, sometimes used, sometimes not. I didn't really set it to anything. And due date, which is sometimes used, sometimes not, and I set it to a date in the future, although it doesn't necessarily matter. I think you still have to set it to something though. And then lastly, in the dispatch data section, I wrote a tiny little bit of JavaScript by copying and pasting, in which I mapped the fields from one form to the other form. And if I were not running today's pre-release, this would work like a charm. So unfortunately, it doesn't. What you should be able to do though is you should be able to test this. It'll show you what it's going to try to do, right? And then you should say execute dispatch action, and kablang, I have an error, sorry about that. But before I got on the phone with you, I was going through this pre-release with our lead developer who has actually identified the error. So hopefully by the time this comes out as a video, that problem will be gone away. So anyway, there's only one last thing I need to do after I save that, is I need to take that new definition and I need to push that back up to my Transform account. So that's it right there. And all I need to do basically at this point is click OK. And it's going to ask, and it's going to show me in JSON format how my all my events look. This is the one that we just created here. Take the electrical form. Anyway, it's sort of code. It's don't really have to read this part. Don't worry about it. And you just click Save Definition. And it says, are you sure you want to save the definition? Because it's going to overwrite what you currently have in Transform Central. I'm going to say yes, because I just pulled down what was in Transform Central and added something to it. So the definition is saved, and it's now set up in Transform Central. And hopefully we should at least be able to take a look at it, at least in theory, even if I don't have it working at the moment until we fix a little bug in the pre-release version I'm running. So let's take a look. I think that is on submit events. And here we go. Here's the JSON view that we saw just a moment ago where I said you don't have to worry about. And here's the list view. That's sort of an easier view to. And this is the dispatch action that we set out right here. When someone fills out the electrical thing, I want you to do a type dispatch. So that is that for doing routing. And of course, the next form could also have dispatch things on it. So it could be going from, again, like I said, like from the electrician, could go to the insulator, could go to the plasterer or drywall person, could go to the plasterer, could go to the painter, could go to the final building inspector or the people who do trim or whatever. You could just have it go from place to place to place all along the route. So let's take a look. Are there any questions that we have today on this or any other general questions? Doesn't look like it, which means I've confused you or did a good job. I'm not sure which. You could let me know. I see. Can you show us how to trigger an action if the due date is passed? Sure. Can you give me a little bit more specific about what you would like to have happen? So the only time that triggers do happen is when you're submitting something, right? That happens on the server side. So if you submitted something and you saw that the due date was passed, then you could write a little piece of JavaScript that might route it to someone else or it could even send an email maybe to a supervisor. So that's one place where you would do that. The other place where the due date is passed would be actually in the form filler itself. You might, when you open up a form, might want to have some sort of warning that shows, I see an email. I see the due date is past that certain time. I'd like to send an email. Sure. Let me take a crack at that one. So I would do that back here at Alpha Anywhere, and I would define another event. Add action. This time it's going to be send email. And send email is my action. Actually, what I wanted to do first is load in my current OnSubmit events so I don't lose them. I'm going to say fetch. There they are. Let's add a new one. We're going to add an email action. And we're going to edit that action. And I'm not sure that we actually have a filter based on due date for this. We could certainly send an email each time. Subject transform data. I think the only filter currently at the moment is going to be based on just what form ID you're doing. So let me find out a little bit more about that. If you want to just send me a reminder email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com, I'd be happy to work that out for you. Are there any other questions? It doesn't look like it. All right. Hey, thanks very much for attending. Thanks, Sarah, for standing by, being ready to answer questions. And hope to see you all next Tuesday at the next Transform Tuesday. Have a great week and stay well. Thanks again. Bye-bye.